Thanks, Katina. Welcome everybody here in the audience and also for people joining us on the live webcast. What I'd like to do is just set the scene. Today we are going to look at identity and diversity in terms of employment and why this matters and what can be done and what should be done about employers being better in this whole area. We have a spectacularly renowned and expert panel with us. My living nightmare as a chair is actually being lived by the fact that we've got somebody joining by international feed, which just sends me into apoplexy if anything goes wrong. But so far, our technology people have been marvelous, and it's looking good. So first of all, I'd like to welcome on the big screen behind us, and also for people on the live feed, there is Dr. Oberdan Marionette. His work in philosophy can be summed up in the motto, Born to be You. He coaches executives, individuals and couples in relation to leadership, relationships and sexuality. And his TED talk, Breaking Out of the Work Cubicle, has been highly successful. So I'm delighted Oberdan's able to join us from Singapore. John Murphy is Director of Financial Services Strategies and Operations Consultancy at Deloitte and also has special responsibility for diversity and inclusivity and works here in London, but obviously with Deloitte's international span will bring in some insights to what we have in our terms of our discussions going later on. Right, okay. Olive Hamilton-Andrews runs her own HR consultancy, specialising in areas of Africa, the Caribbean and the UK. Neil Robertson is the Director of National Skills Academy for Rail and previously was Director of Training at Babcock International. And finally, but by no means least, David Smith is Director of WorldSkills Engagement at the Association of Colleges, a great friend to CityLit. WorldSkills, for those of you who don't know, orchestrates a biennial international competition across 40+ skills areas, and there are 70 member nations. It's a bit like Eurovision Song Contest for skills, but actually a lot more skillful. So I welcome my panel, and what I'd like to do to start off with is just take a step back, where at an Identities Festival we have people who I think get this and understand the importance. But actually I'd like to go to each of our panel and ask, let's take that step back. Why actually is this important? Why is it important to you as individuals, and why is it important to your organisations? Why is this on the agenda now where it wasn't, say, 20 years ago? I was about to turn to Oberdan. Are you still there, Oberdan? Right, okay, that's exactly what I thought might happen. And I feel like asking, the Eurovision metaphor plays true, and so we'll try and rejoin the Moscow jury later. John, what are your thoughts?
So let me contextualise then around why diversity is important. I've worked in fairly large organisations throughout my career, and very pleased that those organisations have also always recognised diversity, I think to an extent, though the model has evolved. The reason why diversity is very important, particularly in a consulting business or any professional skills organisation, is actually the battle for talent is very important. That talent could come from anywhere, and what we're conscious of, particularly in Deloitte, and I'm personally conscious of, is that some people do not have the opportunity to display that talent or know about what might be available to them. Being able to tap into that and find the right skills really brings a nice mix of capabilities together when you're trying to solve difficult problems. I think the thing I'm interested in most, and I maybe overuse the phrase a little bit, but actually if I'm thinking about trying to solve a big international or intellectual challenge in business, is diversity of thought. Because people with different backgrounds, different ideas and different concepts really coming together and trying to find out what works adds a lot of value and power. Second point would be, I don't see why there should be barriers in the workplace for people with different abilities, whatever you define that as, from working. So the fact that an employer needs to adapt and adjust to meet different requirements, whether that be given the fact that we've got a lot of veterans with missing limbs, for instance, but there's so many examples of it, whether it's people who have sight, hearing, or other impairments. I think large companies who can afford to do that should be able to make roles for those people, and actually they really add a lot to diversity of thought. So it's not just a social purpose, it's also a business benefit to bring all of those things together.
Great. It's a good start, Neil.
Well, I agree with everything that's been said already, actually, although I'm going to take a slightly more grinding view of the world. And I represent companies that work in infrastructure sectors, especially rail. So think tracks, trains, pipes, wires, gas, water. And what we do is we help them plan their workforces of the future. And we have very old white male workforces, and those workforces are retiring at an alarming rate. The good news about all of this is that there'll be lots of opportunities for new talent. The huge risk, as well as the opportunity, is that we fill those opportunities with the same kinds of people that are retiring. So we're 4% female, 8% BME, for example. The other piece of good news is that there is a massive goodwill right at the top of all of my members, and I really mean that, a palpable goodwill, to this agenda. So everyone wants to make a change. We don't always know how to do it, and we do have some resource constraints. And I was actually at a dinner to do with High Speed 2 last night, and this issue came up, and somebody from TfL was saying, it costs us £1 million to put a lift in for disabled access. That adds to the cost of your travel. That puts up barriers to everybody else using the travel. Where's the boundary? And, you know, looking at me like I knew the answer to this, of course, which I don't. I'm going to hopefully get that today. So that's our take. We've got a big opportunity, which we mustn't miss, to produce a far more diverse workforce, and we are learning how to do that.
Great. Oberdan, can you hear us?
Well, in a few minutes.
All right, okay. I can see him, so we're getting closer. Olive.
Thank you. I'd just like to start my answer by saying, at one stage in my career, I decided, I got it into my head that I wanted to study accountancy. And I proceeded to apply to different accountancy companies, as you do. And that was an eye-opener for me. I remember one particular response that I got. Dear Ms. Hamilton, thank you so much for your applications, but we just have to inform you that we only recruit from particular university, and our clients come from, our intake comes from a particular set of people. And that kind of summarized it for me. I think it's their loss, actually, that they didn't get me. Yes, it is important, equality and diversity, because on two levels, there's a business case for it and for societal purposes. We are a diverse society, whether we like it or not. It may have only just, not well recently come to the attention of the lawmakers that something does need to be done to promote diversity in the workplace, but this has always been a society where different groups of people have come to live. And not all have had access to work, and when people do get into work, progress has been blocked for one reason or another. So in order to just cope with and acknowledge the type of society that we live in, to ensure that the stresses and strains that come from people who feel excluded are marginalized, and that could be any group. We have the situation with NEETs, with people, young people who aren't in education, employment, or training. People, because of their language skills, their disabilities, because, where people are excluded, it presents tensions, it sets up tensions in society. And there's also a business case. If there's talent, if there's ability, why would you want to exclude and not use that to the best of your ability? That makes no business sense to me at all.
Well, colleagues have articulated, you know, the massively important talent issues, the massively important moral and social and also economic and business case. I guess the last 3 or 4 years of my working life has brought it home to me looking at young people in a particular light. So I spent most of my career in educational, employing people in educational settings, and as most of you will know, educational settings are very famous for having policies on diversity and policies on equality and of recruitment opportunity and so on and so forth. I've spent a lot of time sitting in committee rooms devising policies. And the job that I've been doing over the last few years has been to do with this thing called WorldSkills. And what you do in, when you compete in a WorldSkills international competition, as the UK, is you bring young people, maximum age 23, together from all over the UK, from all sorts of skills backgrounds. So you'll have mechatronics experts, robotics experts, florists, beauty therapists, whatever it is. And of course, they are an incredibly diverse group of people. They come from all over the UK. They come from a variety of settings and backgrounds. And something really magical happens when you put those people together. They actually perform, never mind the fact that they're meeting people who don't operate in their skill area, the bringing of them together into a team setting and the creativity and innovation and confidence building that happens in that setting is just magical to watch. And you know, people who've never been out of inner London or never been away from Belfast or never been out of rural Shropshire meet people from all of those other settings. And there's a particular chemistry that's innovative and creative and progressive. And you know, why would a business not want to tap into that sort of creativity? I spent a lot of my life working with and in the sporting setting, and sports clubs and disciplines have been notoriously monocultural historically. But they are starting to get it, that you only really move forward and become progressive if you actually bring people together with different sort of sets of backgrounds and abilities. So it is a bit of a no-brainer, Mark, really, but as you say, not everybody yet gets it.
Yeah, and I think it's exactly that, and why I asked the question was I was expecting the powerful kind of statements I got here, but at the same time, actually, it's not a given in so many sectors. It's not a given in so many countries. So therefore, the restatement of this, I think, is always really important. Oberdan, can you hear me now? Excellent. Did you catch the question at the beginning, or had we lost you at that point?
I did just before I lost you. We were asking why diversity is important to us individuals.
That's great. So have you got some thoughts or contributions?
Yes, I didn't hear all contribution, so I'm not sure what's being covered. I want to suggest that perhaps bringing a completely different view to the conversation. My opening statement is that diversity is important because we live in an incongruent world that is creating a whole lot of unnecessary suffering. So many of the problems that people came to discuss with me ultimately related to a life that they were living that was incongruent to the essence that they really had with the people that they really wanted to be. Sentences like, I've ended up in this career, I've never really chosen it. I left my dream in the drawer many years ago because I had practical things to take care of. Or write out people who have so disconnected from themselves that can feel intuitively and perhaps emotionally and maybe sometimes at a physical level that they're not living the life they are supposed to be living, and it creates an enormous amount of suffering. And the reason I think is diversity because much of what I am seeing, and I have seen over the years, is we are conditioned to live by somebody else's script. Whether it is as they tell us that these are the subjects we have to complete and these are the standards we have to achieve. If we do it, great. If we don't, we're not going to be having a good life. When it's at work, where we are told, here's your objectives, here's the values by which you have to operate. If you do it, if not, you might have to find a different job. And so many other dimensions of life, all, I dare say, designed to have us comply to somebody else's script, and therefore, in the process, disconnected us from the uniqueness we have to offer. And so I think it's important, socially, culturally, professionally, from a business perspective, economically, and everything else, because we are suffering, and suffering can be alleviated if only we could be allowed to be whoever we are.
Great, and actually it's interesting to hear, because we've heard a variety of views here, all saying that this is very, very positive. But actually there's the person-centric approach of saying, actually as employers we have a duty and an obligation to our employees, but at the same time it's not just a one-way street of doing good, in inverted commas. It's actually the benefit, as a number of you espoused, to saying, well actually you tap into that, you actually unleash talent, you unleash different range of views that enhance the business. So it's not just a sunk cost, a thing that we have to do because we should do. Actually, it is the cliche, the win-win. Can we talk a little bit about the evolution of identity and inclusion? Because I think, you look back to women joining the workforce in massive amounts in the Second World War. That probably is a pivotal point in change, in the journey that is still going on. But it's been a very stop-start journey. And I think for a lot of time it was very binary. It was gender, it was race. And we've moved on hugely from that really in the last 10 to 15 years. In the overarching journey, where do you think we are at this point? Are we doing well? Are we really only at the beginning? Where do you think we are in terms of, and we'll talk Britain for the moment, because I think that we'll start here and then we'll spread our net, because I think it's important, certainly with a number of you have talked internationally, and therefore it's how British organisations who interact internationally, but also it's Britain as a liberal democracy who has certain responsibilities in the world, how we take our place in the world. So can I just ask where you think we are in the journey of getting this right? Who wants to kick off?
Mark, I might just make a point. It's not so much where we are on the journey, it's how unified we are on making the journey. I think we're in a really fragmented position. I did quite a lot of work in and around Brighton, and Brighton is a city, Brighton and Hove is a city that prides itself on a sort of diverse approach to employment and political life generally and culture. And yet there are areas of Brighton that are incredibly monocultural and backward-looking. And, here we are sitting in the heart of one of the greatest cities in the world, and there are areas of London that are paragons of taking things on and moving things forward. But actually, for every one of those success stories, there are parts of the UK that are very, very backward and regressive and fearful of the progress that's being made in some of those places. And so I'm not sure we can actually plot it as a journey along a continuum. I think what we're working towards is some sort of consensus that it is the right way to go, but I think we're a long way from that in a lot of parts of the country, and that does cause tensions, and they surface in all sorts of ways, in all sorts of settings.
I think that's a brilliant point. So I'll take my definition back. I'll go to yours because I think that's really good. Is how do people think we are on this fragmented journey? John?
So again, maybe we'll recast the definition because that one also works for me. I don't think it's a linear journey at all. I think diversity, I hope, is a fact, that there are people from different skills and different backgrounds and always will be. I like the fact that there's a different world and I can meet people from different backgrounds, whether that's in a fun way to argue about a sports team or in a different way of having different thoughts, different ideas, or learning something new. I think I agree as well with the patchwork, but I would amplify maybe a couple of points around that. So I think there are some things the UK can be very proud of, maybe not a cultural norm for us to be proud or boastful, which I don't really mean, but emphasis, in a way of some of the very progressive thinking about skills, employability, diversity and inclusion is quite leading, to put that in a cultural context, and the awareness of those values is quite good, but not as good as we would like. The second point I think I would make about some of the challenges, and I think I need to make 3 points on this one, is that we have a mix of different businesses in this country. I think largely because very large corporates, of which are small parts really of our overall economy, but quite pervasive in terms of large brands, and we think about them as being very big, have had policies and HR departments and functions, and over years I've probably had people who are inspirational in those organisations or thinking about it, are not bad at all. Maybe I could even be more, it's a very English answer to me, right, from what I just said. Right? They're good. They can be very good in this sort of stuff, being aware of it, tracking it, and trying to be responsible and sensible employers that are giving something back while also getting that value that we talked about. I think the third point, though, is a bit more reflecting on ourselves as human animals and what and do we are. It can be very difficult, I think, for people at different points in time, but certainly if they're in any vulnerable state, so maybe age is a classic one, because at least that's something we all hopefully face as it increases. It can be very scary to have a monocultural environment where suddenly people from different cultures come into it. And unfortunately, you get quite disappointing reactions at first if that's done in the wrong way or not supported in some sort of inclusive way. So that this leads to problems that, I think it's a little bit over the top to talk about ghettoisation here, but there are pockets where we know that maybe people from different culture have arrived and not been integrated very well because the thinking wasn't there, the funding wasn't there, the will might have been, but people didn't get to it. I think there is a human aspect to all of this, that it can be difficult to figure out for the first time how to work with someone who's missing a limb, or work with someone who's partially sighted, or work with someone who speaks English as a second or third language, or comes with very different cultural, religious, sexuality norms to them that you've not experienced before. So I think we have to cut ourselves a little bit of slack, but maybe just be a bit more aware of the fact it's difficult to get used to those things and give ourselves a chance and some time to do it.
Great. Oberdan, yeah, obviously you're in Singapore, but I know you've done a lot of work in the UK. What are your thoughts on this?
I can hear you guys are speaking. Unfortunately, I cannot understand what's being said, and I didn't move the question either.
Oh, right. So basically the question is where do you think we are in terms of progress on identities issues here in the UK? We're going to discuss more about the international environment, but specifically in the UK, where do you think, are we doing well? Have we got a lot to do? One of the comments already has been, it's actually not linear, it's been very fragmented. Some organisations are doing well, and a lot of organisations aren't even in the race yet. Does that make sense?
I'd like to paraphrase, because again, I couldn't hear properly. The question was about the UK, and some employers are doing well in terms of identities, and some employers might not be doing so well. Where do I think we are with progress? Is that correct?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, yes. I definitely think we have made huge progress compared to 20 years ago when I first moved to the UK and eventually became a citizen. From a business perspective, I have seen over the last 4 or 5 years, while I was still in corporate, debate on diversity, inclusion and identity, therefore to somewhat beyond original focus on gender and religious differences to a broader debate. But the most important thing, I've not only observed a broader debate, but I've observed that at least in some segments of business, people have begun to talk about it with meaning. It stopped being, at least for them, what should I call it, a tick box exercise. And they genuinely embarked on campaigns to really look at diversity and identities as a genuine tool for competitive advantage. And not only from a business perspective, but also because it's important as a human ingredient, shall we call it. Having said that, I think taking the conversation slightly outside of the business realm and reading over the last few days reaction to the election of the new mayor in London, I think we get a clear sense that the genuine appreciation for diversity might not be as widely spread as in this forum like it to be. So, great progress, a lot more work to do.
Great. Olive.
I just like to recount just another anecdote. Earlier this week, I decided to leave the car at home and take the bus into town. And on the way back on the bus, I sat beside this lady. And we got talking. It turns out that she comes from Somalia. And she had come to this country from Sweden, where she'd spent the previous, say, 25 years or so. And she said the reason why she was here was because her brother had persuaded her to come, because in the UK, she could have a better life. In Sweden, she felt that she was restricted in doing that. But in the UK, she said she saw people who looked like her with houses and cars. They had professions. So using that as a marker, there's some progress being made. I would also say that up until about 2.5 years ago, I worked in the NHS. I worked as a head of corporate affairs for a regional health authority. Population, about 5.8 million, the health services, organizing those health services for those people. And one of my responsibilities as head of corporate affairs was to have responsibility for implementing or making the arrangements for these policies, equality and diversity policies. When the Equality Act came into being, how were we going to implement that practically? It was interesting to just observe the process of working through that. I don't doubt for a minute the commitment and the progress that has been made in getting people with protected characteristics into positions where they are respected and that they can do the best that they can to do the jobs that they've been given to do. But I came up as working with an executive team, with the directors, the people who run organizations, and it was a case of, why are you concerning, why are you bringing this to us? This is an HR thing, right? It really, the impression that it's getting is that it really shouldn't have too much of an impact. As long as we tick the boxes, as long as we do what we're legally required to do, it's okay. From the position that I was in that organization, I would say that I did get accustomed to turning up to meetings where I was the only black face in the room. It didn't faze me after a while. You just get accustomed to it. It's just the way it is. I would look around and see that we have policies and people were on the surface of it doing what they should do. But when plum projects came up, things that people decided that, oh, this piece of work needed to be done, it was a tap on the shoulder. It was, there was no opportunity for other people in the organization who felt that, who probably had skills to do this and were in a position to move on to do this. There was no chance for looking because a competent pair of hands it was handed over to. So I'm saying that to say that progress has been made, but there's some bastions that still need to be attacked. And this is not a matter of policies or even legislation to some extent. It's a mindset thing. So I'm not too sure how you do that. To some extent, people know what they need to do and they will play the game and they will do what they have to do on the surface. It's what's going on underground that really impacts the situation. And I see that working another way, so I'm taking a bit of, in that I live in a very diverse part of London. I live in Redbridge, London Borough of Redbridge, and I am involved in one or two community things in Redbridge. I'm a governor for our local Institute of Further Education. I see it working another way as well. I see that communities, the public sector is doing what it should do, and it's pushing on. But the majority of businesses in this country are private sector. They're small businesses, small, medium enterprises. And there, people can do whatever they want. And I see monocultures, in another sense, set up, not just the prevailing culture, but for smaller groups. I can walk into a shop and it's for a particular group of people. It works the other way as well.
Yeah.
So there's progress, but there's still work to be done on all fronts.
Neil, you'll get to go first for this question, but I just want to follow up on a couple of points that have been made. Policies, processes, procedures are all very good because they underpin this. We've talked about that twice so far. There is also a danger you get a tick box, cover your arse approach to that. So how do you get that balance right? Because certainly in the corporate world where I worked 15 years ago, diversity seemed to be along there with health and safety. We had to basically dunk everybody in some sort of mini training program, and therefore really, what was the purpose? It wasn't about diversity, it was avoiding a lawsuit. So we can say, well, everybody did the diversity workshop, and therefore whatever they did was some aberration. And for me, the balance is actually quite dangerous because you're too reliant on codifying things. It becomes about codifying things rather than the hearts and minds piece. So sorry, I'm just throwing that one open to you first.
Well, at the risk of sounding like a gloomy Scot, I think on our journey, we like linear journeys and trains because they go better. I think we're about Watford, which if we were wanting to get to Manchester isn't very far. But I think the good news is that we've got enough fuel to get us to Manchester. And I really think we have gone both beyond the tick box. We've been through that with health and safety. We're obsessed with health and safety. We've been through that, and it's now a mindset. We are less far on this question, but we are certainly beyond tick box, but we've not done much of it yet, and we will have those difficult experiences that you've described. They will be traumatic. We will then create tick boxes or processes, and remember, we're engineering led, so we will naturally want to create processes because that's the physics, and physics is how you run things. But the really good news is that the goodwill, the mindset is really in a better place than you're describing 15 years ago. But I think that if you were to scratch the surface of the complexity of the understandings of identity, then you would be disappointed, I think. So there's we know where we want to get to, we're keen to get there, but we still need some help.
Other people join in on that point that we've just been talking about. John?
So, yeah, a few thoughts on that one, I think, just reflecting on it. Going through process, training, compliance, You know, I come from a firm today that's a professional services firm and incredibly risk averse and doesn't want to get into trouble, both by not doing the wrong thing and therefore selling its own reputation, not just to avoid a lawsuit, but clearly in any commercial business the last thing you want to do is get dragged through anything that's reputationally damaging. But I think I was thinking about how would you take the journey of diversity even further. So what would I do next if I thought I was in a fairly good place but would like to push on? The first thing I'd think is the door's definitely open. Everyone's having the conversation, there's fuel for the train, it's there, so that's a good time to go after something. I think in terms of diversity, my point before, to try and be a little bit congruent about it, identity, I expect, will keep evolving. So some of the identity differences we recognise and try and integrate today may change in the future as people do different roles in society and take on different personas and try and, in a busy, very populated world, struggle for space to identify themselves and who they are in that world and how they define themselves to others. So I think one of the best things that I would think about doing to move beyond policy and processes and procedures, which you're right should be a safety net, but I still want to walk across the tightrope. I think it's about telling stories. I think it's about showing where these things worked and celebrating successes of diversity and just showing people who might be nervous or risk averse, so trying to get the easier ones and work through from, there's people who just get this and want to do it, so they're easy. I don't worry about them for that. I might need to think about them with something else. There must be a next set of, this looks good, but I don't know where to start. How do I do it? How do I encourage it? I think telling them stories and celebrating those stories in an engaging way, not in a long newsletter that takes 2 hours to read and you never read it because it gets sent out on a Friday night and you just had enough. Those sort of things, and rituals, awards, behaviours, some of those sort of things that can either let people be incentivised because they like to get medals or they like to get awards, or because they're curious, or because they want to know that someone else has done it before, because they're not natural early adopters, is a good way to progress beyond policy procedure, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with everything that John said there. There's a big watch out, it should be starting on Monday. I hope it's good, but there's a big campaign starting next week about apprenticeships. This is a government that's absolutely committed to apprenticeships. And it's, you know, the slogan is going to be get in, go far, and there'll be TV adverts and there'll be plot lines in some of the soaps and so on and so forth, because of the commitment to deliver 3 million apprenticeships in this Parliament. It will be really interesting to see how that campaign plays, you know, what we all suspect could be the stereotypes of what apprentices look like in various professions. And in terms of the WorldSkills stuff that I've been involved in, if I said to you, what do you think the plumbing medalist looked like for the UK in the last WorldSkills, you probably would be able to describe him, because it would be a him. If I said, what did the beauty therapist look like, you'd probably be able to describe her, because it would be a her. If I said, what did the UK winner of the forensic science medal look like, or the mechatronics medal, or the robotics medal, I think you might struggle, because actually there was no cultural background that defined who was moving forward in that sphere. It was all open. So where you get innovation and something new, and you can start from a clean slate, it's much easier to actually prove and show how it all works. Where you've got cultural lag, and we know that parents and friends are still the most important determiners in what young people go into in terms of the jobs that they do. Where you've got that cultural lag, it's really, really tough to break out of that. We were sitting at a cafe and a couple of white vans pulled up outside, and Neil said, I know exactly what the guys getting out of that are going to look like, and they did look like that. And, you know, that is really tough stuff. So you've got to work with the grain and with the successes, and sometimes the successes are in the greenfield sites where things are new. And that doesn't mean you ignore everything else, but you've got to have some champions and some ambassadors from those sites to prove the case, I think.
I think that leads us on nicely to the idea of identity isn't a thing. You're not just a woman.
Yeah.
You're not just a certain age. You know, you are an overlay of all of these identities, and that's something that is an area of research and idea that's only really in its relative infancy in the employment arena. So we would potentially have a maternity policy and a race policy and something else, but actually knitting them together is actually far more complicated. And if you go from a very legalistic point of view, it would be the most turgid document known to mankind. But if you get the overarching methodology, the openness right, then that's actually quite exciting. And the idea that you don't just define yourself by one tick box is something that was a lot of what the discussion was around yesterday. Oberdan, are you hearing me? I can, where...
Or also following, albeit with a delay, the typing on a live stream. In fact, thank you for calling me in. I wanted to make a comment because I heard the words policies and processes, and I wanted to contribute an experience. In 2008, when the financial world as we knew it collapsed, I had the opportunity to see it from within financial services, and many of the banks, many of the financial institutions more broadly, very quickly responded to the barrage of negative commentary that was coming from the media and from society by investing time, money and effort in changing their cultures, recreating a new philosophy of leadership, and trying to rebalance the view that society had gained from what had happened, and the intent there being we want to be seen again as valuable members of society. And I was in charge of a project that was leading to the change in culture, the change in perceived value in the outside world. And the angle that I was in charge to look at was the leadership angle. Before we found a solution, I had a small study to try and understand what was happening within our ecosystem that had led to some of the things that society was perceiving, right or wrong. I'm not here to comment on that, it's irrelevant, but the reputation and pitch that was being painted was clearly pointing in one direction. And if you're familiar with the Milgram study of the 1960s, where people were experimenting on the ability of human beings to make decisions when submitted to a high figure of authority and power. What was somewhat shocking and perhaps surprising to find in my study was that the rule book that banking and financial services as a whole was subjected to had become an excuse for people to abdicate responsibility. And was like the moment I enter the doors of the business and I'm wearing this visible cloak over me, I'm not me anymore, I'm not required to be me anymore, I'm not required to bring in my individual decision making because the rule book says so. I'm exaggerating for illustrative purposes, but that was the gist of what we had found. And the impact of that was that some of the leadership decisions some of our colleagues were making were completely detached from what was happening out there in the world and from considering what might happen out there in the world if I take a decision. So I share this experience because while there's definitely a systemic issue at play, and I think I heard earlier the word mindset also being spoken, while I believe that rules and policies and processes absolutely must be part of the solution, I highlight that experience because it's one that showed to me in that tiny slice of life that I am describing that excessive rules take away our ability to be ourselves, including when we are making decisions that could be life-changing, or maybe not for us, for others, but definitely life-changing. And so, in my opinion, there also needs to be a call back to the individual and a sense of responsibility that I, as an individual, with my identity, with my values, bring to context within which I operate. And to close, I want to tease out the last comment I made in saying that I believe in business there's often a complete lack of focus on hiring individuals and select leaders who are not only able to do the job, but can also bring their value to the business proposition in a way that is aligned with what the business is aiming to represent, the value it wants to bring to society, its customers, its clients, and so on and so forth.
I'd like to, that's very helpful, Oberdan. I'd like to take the issue of leadership forward. We all have responsibilities around leadership in our sectors, or in our departments, or in our small groups, and especially cross-denominational teams that now go on in most businesses look and pull in people from different backgrounds. What actually is the role of the leader in this process? Is it by example? Is it by mindset? Where do we sit in this? I'm intrigued to who wants to go first.
Well, I mean, I think if we're just narrowing this down to leadership in business and employing settings, there is something about the leader getting it and understanding that in order to do her or his job and create the most successful business possible, this is the right thing to do. So there's something about the leader understanding the business imperative ahead of everything else. Not necessarily in the sense of deprioritizing moral or social reasons for building diversity, but just simply realizing that to be smart, I should be demonstrating and encouraging and supporting the building of innovation and creativity through a diverse workforce. You know, leaders need to be smart, and they need to demonstrate that smartness, I think, in this regard.
Yeah, great. Olive.
Thank you. I'm just thinking about this from different perspectives because if I'm thinking with my public sector hat on, or a big organization type hat on, then regardless, I guess, the leader, I think, has the responsibility of setting the values and living the values and putting into place the structures throughout the whole of the business that reflects those values. So we talked earlier about the tick box thing, which is important and is vital. We need some measures to make sure that we're achieving outcomes. Leaders have responsibilities for articulating where it is that we're going, what it is that the business stands for, and how we're going to get there. And a big part, I think, of that is to recognize, to monitor the environment that you're working in, to know when people are subverting the policies, to know what really is happening in the organization. So this thing about leaders having their ear to the ground, or having people who have their ear to the ground and being in touch with that. I think it's also important for leaders to make sure that managers are held accountable, that individual staff members know what it is that the business is about in this area and what it stands for, and to hold all accountable. And one of those measuring, this is one time when measuring really is important, is basically getting these things into people's objectives. You're talking about objectives and appraisals, because if it is kept in front of people, if it is there where each individual has something that they need to do, to act on, and they're held accountable for that, that helps as well. I think it works. I was saying that, I was thinking about it from a public sector point of view. If I'm thinking of myself as a small business person, I don't employ a lot of people, or people directly. But in terms of who it is that I ask to do work, how it is that I treat those people, who it is that I liaise with, have partnerships with, it speaks. So my activities back up what it is that my values are.
Neil? I think Olive's given a really good contribution there. I would only add that I think if you want to make a change, it's the people with the most power that need to change, not the people with the least power. And we've often said, well, why can't women just recognise the value of engineering and then it'll all be well? When really there's something about saying, well, actually maybe it's the people with the most power that need to change how they present engineering, if that's what they do. So it has to start from the top. And I think it is starting from the top, actually. And I meet the leaders of most of the big companies that supply our services, and to hear whose van was outside. They were the best of all their peers at introducing more gender diversity. They were one of the worst on BME. And the leaders spotted that, spent time understanding why, and actually they found that there was blatant racism happening in some of their rural depots out in Essex and places like that. And it was shocking. But they took the trouble, they were engineers, so they wanted to measure something, but actually they did. And then when they looked into it, they found something that they could then address. And actually, you know, the complexity here was that the unions had a really important role to play, I think, in reinforcing some of this. We haven't really talked about unions yet in terms of workplaces, but I think they can be a source mostly of good, but sometimes they can be a regressive force as well. But yes, so I think the monitoring is really important.
I think taking the point about overt and not so obvious characteristics and identities, because I think, you know, I'll take the example of me. You see a slightly older than I'd like to think I am white male. I pander to a probably 1950s stereotype of a college principal. College principals now look considerably different. But actually, probably what's less obvious is that I'm gay, I'm dyslexic. Most of my colleagues think I'm quite obviously ADHD. Those are the characteristics that make up the various bits that I am. Now, it's not obvious that I'm dyslexic to most people. In fact, when I went to the dyslexic teachers group, everybody kind of looked at, really? Oh, right. So the work environment about non-obvious characteristics, but are very important to the individual, whether it's they've managed to cover it up through coping mechanisms or whether they don't want to talk about it. How do we get those characteristics to be supported, and actually just people understanding generally identity isn't the tick box. We've done race, we've done gender, we've done sexual identity. So, John, I'll throw that to you first.
Yeah, so can I tie it together with leadership as well? So trying to think about comments that might be helpful or I hope people will at least resonate with. So leadership, let me break it down at a few different levels. So leadership as in what we think about as either, depending on your point of view, fat cats running businesses all the way through to innovative and inspiring people who are setting up businesses and being very commercial. The person at the top of even a small medium enterprise or certainly a large corporate environment certainly can't do as I say but not as I do. So I think the whole point about trying to mirror your own values and make sure that you are at least self-aware enough to know that if this is my behaviour. And how do you help people do that? So I think moving away from the depths of trying to get larger companies, when you lose track of people and there's just more complexity and more individuality, to think about purpose. What's the higher purpose, a small h, higher purpose of that organisation? And that won't just be a commercial thing. But spending some time on defining that and what it means is a lot easier to then cope with the fact that I've got lots of different individuals in the organisation at different levels and different levels of leadership. So what is that unifying purpose that either tells you you're in the right organisation or maybe you're not and need to look around? That is a helpful thing to do if you get it right, and you need to spend the time and think about it. I think having leaders at lots of levels is always very useful, even if it creates problems of banging heads together and trying to figure out which one's right when lots of people have got good ideas. I would rather have the problem of too many leaders. So I really look to teams that if I thought about, somewhere, whether it be in London or internationally, there'll be a team of hopefully super bright and talented and personable people working on some client's issue in a room, and they probably just started today. They may not have worked together before, some of them might know each other, can't tell, maybe different languages and backgrounds. The leader of that team, probably just what we might call as a manager, their responsibility really to me is about, well, who's here? What's different about them? And over time, learning about them and how do I get the best out of them? So there's a role of management that needs to be quite, there's some sacrifice in it. There's some non-selfish behaviours that really need to be required to get the best out of people. Of management being actually your responsibility is to bring the best out of your team, not to be famous for all their good work. Some people get that. I'm not trying to lecture or teach, I hope it's not coming across that way, but some people need to be encouraged to behave in that way. So I also don't mind if someone on that team is a leader of their own local community, whether that's a faith community, something that they do in their borough, in their town, whether that's something in an organised community around diversity within the workplace. We have very active communities in our organisation, and other people do too. We have the classic ones you might expect of maybe a women's network, but also there's a very active Sikh network. There's also other active networks. And when those things are self-sustaining and fit within the purpose of what we do and wanting to be diverse, they're great things. So I could have someone who's really quite junior in the firm, but I'll let them lead in the community. Why not? It's great. It's great for business. So I think there are lots of things around figure out those types of identities where people will group together rather than being massively individualistic, that you get the crosshairs right down to a point of individualism where you can't really join up, and saying, well, why don't you have a community around that? Is there something to celebrate together, to share together that's useful? Great, have it, run, and be leaders in that way. And also then, for the leaders at the top, just to go back up, look at those leaders who aren't just leading the most successful commercial, the best engineered projects. Look at those people who are actually leading teams of people and pulling them together and getting the best results of them in different aspects, as well as doing their day job. And consider them when you're tapping people on the shoulder or actually running through a more successful process.
Yeah. As we're coming close to the end of our time, I'd like to look beyond Britain and look at the international situation. In some ways, there's huge progress being made. Western Europe, lots of laws have been passed, lots of laws have been internalised. But then actually you look at the situation more widely, the anti-gay laws in Russia, the prejudice that women principals, we were talking about earlier, when they go to Saudi Arabia. Actually, what's shocking to me is what are now known as the bathroom laws that have been passed in North Carolina and Mississippi, not allowing transgender people to use the bathroom of their choice. The Attorney General in the US, and it's a clip that I would encourage everybody to look at, is the Attorney General is now prosecuting North Carolina, and she made a wonderful speech about the evolution of human rights. It's worth going. It's 7 minutes on CNN, and I'd watch all of it because it was on Monday night. But what is our responsibility, not just getting our own house in order, but actually challenging and advocating beyond our borders? And we have a lot of international experience in the group. So is there anybody who'd like to kind of kick off on that topic? Oberdan first? Yeah, would you like to?
Yeah, so many angles that are coming to mind, trying to quickly think what would be most useful. Moving from the UK after 15, 16 years living there and coming over to Asia, I arrived here with what I thought was an already open, aware stance as to some of the Asian ways, informed both by my multiple travels to Asia over the years for holidays and cultural experiences, and most importantly, being married to an Asian woman for a few years who comes from the region. And I was certainly not prepared as I thought, and definitely not aware for the experience I then had. And there's two angles that I want to take from here. One that links back to the point I made earlier: rules can be overbearing, but absolutely must for them to be in place at some level. And then a more personal note about our Western stance that I'm seeing quite often. From a rules perspective, coming to a country where there aren't as many protections for diversity domains within the workplace. I have heard of stories and I have seen stories in smaller organizations that are not governed by international agreements and frameworks, of employees who are subjected to what we would very clearly call discrimination, and of the illegal type in the UK, who have nowhere to turn to because the framework here isn't as sophisticated yet as the one in the UK. So I say this, one, in recognition of how much is available and how much has been done in the UK, and two, to highlight that international reality might not be as supportive. And if I look further afield from where I am, but within the region still, the situation often just gets worse. And so even just focusing on wanting to put a basic legal frameworks, policies, processes and guidelines within organizations would already be a humongous step forward. The second angle I wanted to share was the realization that I wasn't as aware and as prepared as I thought, brought to the surface a lens with which, the moment I became aware of it, with which I started this reality popping up in so many places, both in terms of how we do work, and also in what type of thinking we try to influence and help with. So I can think of examples where we would be talking about leadership, or now in current additional work where I talk about sexuality and sexual education, and invariably the majority of the sources that we feel comfortable to rely on are the sources that come from the UK, the US, and broadly speaking, Western traditions. And if we look at, literature and the traditions here in Asia, both of leadership as well as of sexuality, there's documents that go back hundreds or thousands of years, as it might be the case for the Kama Sutra or some of the earlier educational documents from China. And so what I want to highlight is that our desire to help, to inform, and to influence the debate in a way that can move and progress to a place where we can all be allowed to be ourselves in our identities, whichever they are, that we ought to be careful to remain open, very open, to what the other cultures we are looking to help have to offer, knowing that however aware we think we are, and I'm speaking for myself and my experience, there are still going to be nuances in the debate that we just cannot appreciate, not even if we have lived there 16 years and have become citizens of that country.
That's very helpful. Are there other colleagues interested in joining in on this one? Yeah.
I introduced HNDs at scale to China when working for a public authority in Scotland. And at least a third of my board said we shouldn't be doing this because of the human rights record that people saw in China. I would agree with Oberdan. I think we learned a lot from that situation, and we had the opportunity to share a lot. So we refused, we insisted that the bits of the HND programme which you would recognise as being more Western were taught. So we didn't give the educational institutions the opportunity to drop that, nor did we allow the political component to Chinese university education to be included in the qualification, which was one suggestion. I felt my board might have had a heart attack at that particular point, and rightly so. So we learned a lot, and I would echo Oberdan's thing. It's very dangerous to think that you know it all and that others need to change to be like you. And I think the way to exchange ideas is to be there, even if you're occasionally uncomfortable. Having said all of that, work in the Middle East I have found much harder, personally, just because of the really extreme discrimination of women, including women that I might want to put forward as the professional representatives of my business. Now, that's not a reason not to do it, and my view is the same. We should be working with people in all different cultures, but some are harder than others, aren't they?
Yeah. Some final thoughts from other colleagues? Olive?
Yeah, I'd just like to reflect that Western Europe didn't get to where it is today overnight. And, you know, there were a lot of struggles. People died in the process. Hopefully, having learned from our experiences, other settings, other countries might not have to work their way through every stage of that process. Nevertheless, I think it's important to respect with a small r where people are. Yeah, we're not condoning, but other people who have other practices or other beliefs are not irrational necessarily. They're not inferior in their thinking. It's where they're at this particular stage. And I think we need to start from that point. I think the example that you've given of introducing a course and not compromising on key points is an ideal way to do that. I believe, yes, you have to engage and you have to be consistent in doing it. And also what tends to happen, I note, is that wherever at a national level, leaders make observations about something wrong in somebody else's country, the fingers point right back at them and say, but look at what you're doing in that particular setting. So we want to be careful about how we do it, but consistent, determined about doing it. We know that there are lots of different methods used now. You use the fist in the iron fist in the velvet glove with aid, with providing aid, financial aid, economic aid to countries. The whole cultural thing. You have the British Council, for example, who will go and promote British Council and the British values and British culture, and all of that is there. So there are times, there are different ways of going about it. I think there is a time and a place to speak out. But there are also times when you just have to go under the radar and just keep at it. And like I said, I firmly believe that these beliefs are not irrational. If people can see the value, and usually an economic value, everybody responds to that, eventually and over time.
Great. I'm going to draw the session to a close. I would like to thank the panel. I think we've covered a lot of areas. I think this is a discussion. I think, as we said earlier, this is a journey. It's a multi-stage journey. Different bits of the journey are being achieved in different ways. There is still a hell of a lot to do. I think that's the overarching piece that I think we would happily sum at this point. But at least there is progress being made in a direction. So all of you, and in particular Oberdan for staying late and also dealing with technological challenges, thank you very much. I think we're now going to take a break. So therefore the panel's around. If anybody from the audience wants to come and have a chat, ask a question, feel free. But again, I think this panel's been excellent because you've brought a lot of experience and a lot of different perspectives. So to all of you, thank you very much. All right.
That's great. Thank you very much. So tea and coffee outside at the far end. Please do then come back for mass therapy with a little health warning in that this one's got some language that may cause some people a little bit distressed. So come back prepared, you know.